The wind howled through the dark forest like a wounded animal. Ryan sat at his small desk, the glow of his lamp the only light in the lonely outpost. Outside, rain tapped against the window, steady but growing heavier. It was a quiet night, or at least it should have been. This planet was far from any major city, far from trouble. Ryan liked it that way, but tonight felt different. The air seemed heavier, like it carried a warning. A sudden scratching sound came from the metal door. Ryan froze, pen still in his hand. At first, he thought it was the wind pushing a branch. But then the scratching came again, slower, deliberate, like small claws. He stood up, walking too. The door cautiously, his boots echoed softly on the steel floor. When he reached the door, he hesitated. On a world like this, opening the door without knowing what was outside could be dangerous. Still, something in the sound. It didn't feel threatening. It felt desperate. He pulled the latch. The door creaking open. Cold wind rushed in, carrying the scent of wet earth and something else. Something wild. There, in the dim light spilling from the outpost, was a tiny figure. A girl, but not human. Her ears were long and pointed, covered in soft gray fur. Her yellow eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the light like a wolf's. Her tail, bushy and soaked with rain. Curled tight around her legs, she was shivering. Hard. Clutching a torn blanket to her chest, rain dripped from her hair, plastering it against her small face. She looked up at him, and for a moment, Ryan couldn't move. She didn't speak, only made a soft, broken whimper. The sound went straight into his chest. She was young, maybe the size of a human child, but her eyes, they were the eyes of someone who had seen too much fear. Ryan glanced behind her. The forest loomed, black and restless. Somewhere out there, he thought he saw movement. Two faint glimmers, like eyes watching, then gone. His hand tightened on the doorframe. "You can't stay out there," he said quietly. She tilted her head as if trying to understand. When he stepped aside, she hesitated, her bare feet shifting in the mud. A low rumble of thunder rolled over the hills. She flinched at the sound, pressing herself tighter against the wall. Finally, she stepped forward, slow and cautious. Ryan could see her sharp claws, not long enough to be dangerous, more like a frightened animal's defense. As soon as she crossed the threshold, Ryan shut the door quickly. The outpost's heater hummed softly, filling the room with warmth. She stood there dripping water onto the floor, looking small and out of place. Ryan grabbed a towel from the shelf and offered it to her. She looked at it like she didn't know what it was. When he motioned, she copied his gesture, drying her hair awkwardly. Her ears twitched at every sound outside. He noticed the faint marks on her neck. A thin metal collar was fastened there, scratched and dented like it had been on her for a long time. "Where did you come from?" he asked. No answer. She kept her eyes on the door, as if expecting someone or something to break it down at any second. Ryan poured her a cup of warm broth. The moment he handed it to her, she sipped quickly, then gulped it down like she hadn't eaten in days. Her hands shook the whole time. When she finished, she glanced at him, then at the empty cup, almost afraid to ask for more. He filled it again without a word. This time, she drank slower, her breathing easing a little. Outside, the wind pushed harder against the walls. Somewhere in the distance, a deep howl rose through the trees. Not a natural howl, too controlled, too cold. The girl froze, ears snapping upright, her tail bristling. She moved closer to Ryan without thinking, her small fingers clutching the edge of his jacket. Ryan felt his own pulse quicken. Who was out there? And why was she so afraid? He stepped to the window, pushing the curtain aside just enough to see. At first, there was only the rain and shadows. Then, between the trees, two tall shapes appeared, armored, holding long weapons that glinted under the faint light. Their faces were hidden behind dark masks. They moved slowly, Scanning the forest like predators, Ryan's stomach tightened. These were no wanderers. They were hunters, and they were looking for something. He glanced at the girl, who was watching him with wide, pleading eyes. Her lips moved slightly, but only one word escaped, a whisper almost lost to the sound of rain. Please. Ryan didn't know who she was. He didn't know why she had been sleeping outside his door in the cold, but he knew one thing. If he let her go back into that forest, she would not survive the night. Somewhere deep inside, a decision formed. He locked the door, dimmed the lights, and moved her toward the back of the room, away from the windows. The hunters passed by, their voices low, speaking in a language Ryan didn't understand. Minutes felt like hours until their shadows finally disappeared into the trees. The girl stayed close to him, her small frame trembling less now. Ryan sat back at his desk. Though his mind was far from his work, outside, the storm raged on. But inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. He knew this was only the beginning. Asterisk. The storm lasted through the night. Ryan didn't sleep much. Every time he closed his eyes, he thought he heard something outside, a branch snapping heavy footsteps in the mud. The faint hum of alien machinery each time he would check the window. But there was nothing there. The girl, however, didn't move from her spot. She had curled up beside the small heater, her tail wrapped tightly around her body, her ears twitching at every sound. Even in sleep, she didn't seem to rest. Her breathing was quick, shallow, like she was ready to run at any second. By morning, the rain had stopped, but a heavy mist covered the ground. Ryan poured a cup of warm tea for himself. The smell seemed to wake her because she slowly sat up, her golden eyes catching the light. She blinked at him, but said nothing. Morning, he said gently. She tilted her head, as if listening to the tone rather than the words. Ryan handed her a small plate with bread and fruit. She took it carefully, sniffing the food before eating. She ate quickly, but not as wildly as the night before. It was clear she hadn't had a real meal in a long time. Ryan tried to talk to her while she ate. "What's your name?" he asked. No answer. He tried again, slower. "Name." "You?" Still nothing. She only glanced at the door again, her ears lowering slightly. Ryan frowned. It wasn't that she didn't understand. It was that she didn't trust him yet. He noticed her collar again, the thin band of metal pressing against her fur and skin. It had no visible lock, only strange markings along the side. When he reached toward it, she stiffened. Her claws gripped the edge of her blanket. Her eyes were wide, not angry, but full of fear. Ryan pulled his hand back, speaking softly. "All right, I won't touch it." She relaxed a little, but her gaze stayed on him. That collar was more than just metal. It was a memory she couldn't forget. A sudden noise outside made her ears flick sharply. Ryan moved to the window and saw a group of traders passing by on the dirt path. They were alien merchants with carts full of goods, speaking in loud, cheerful voices. But the moment the girl saw them, she shrank back, hiding behind Ryan's chair. She gripped the leg of the chair tightly. Her tail was puffed up again. Ryan crouched beside her. "They're just traders. They won't hurt you." But she didn't believe it. Her whole body was tense. Whatever had happened to her before, it had taught her that strangers meant danger. Ryan decided to test something. He left the door unlocked for a moment and stepped away to check his tools. When he returned, the girl was standing at the door, but she didn't try to leave. Instead, she was peeking out carefully, scanning the path and the mist-covered forest beyond. She shut the door quickly and sat back down, wrapping herself in the blanket again. Ryan realized something important. She had the freedom to leave, but she stayed. That meant she was more afraid of what was out there than of him. By midday, the mist began to thin. Ryan worked on repairing a broken generator, but he kept glancing at her. She wandered the small outpost slowly, touching things like she had never seen them before. The shelf of books, the light switches, the heater. When she found a small radio, she pressed the buttons curiously. Static filled the room, making her ears twitch. She smiled faintly for the first time, just a small curl of her lips before turning the radio off again. Ryan tried again to get her to talk. He pointed to himself. Ryan. Then he pointed to her, waiting. She stared for a long time. Then lowered her eyes. No sound came out. Instead, she sat down near him, her tail brushing his boot like she was marking her place. It wasn't speech, but it was trust, in her own way. The day passed quietly until evening came. Ryan was cooking a small meal when the sound returned, the low, cold howl from the night before. It was distant, but it carried through the forest like a warning. The girl froze. Her spoon halfway to her mouth, her eyes locked on the door, and she moved closer to him without thinking. Ryan turned off the light and stepped to the window. Shapes moved in the mist, too far to make out clearly. But he knew it wasn't just traitors this time. The girl's claws lightly gripped his sleeve. Her body trembled. In a soft voice, barely more than a breath, she whispered her first word to him. Don't open. Ryan's heart beat faster. She could speak, she just hadn't trusted him enough, until now. And if she was speaking now, it meant she knew something dangerous was coming. They sat in silence for the next hour. No knocks came, no voices called out, but Ryan could feel it. The hunters were near. The girl stayed by his side the entire time, her eyes never leaving the door. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know why she had been hunted, but he knew one thing. If they came for her again, he wouldn't give her up. The outpost was quiet, too quiet. Ryan sat at his desk, tools scattered in front of him. The girl, he still didn't know her name, sat curled up in the corner. Her golden eyes half closed but alert, her ears flicked every few seconds, picking up sounds he couldn't hear outside. The night had swallowed the forest in thick darkness. The moon was hidden behind heavy clouds. A cold wind rattled the window. Ryan tried to focus on fixing a loose wire in his comms device, but the tension in the air was making it hard to think. Then, a sudden bang at the door made him jump. It wasn't a knock. It was a heavy, deliberate strike. The girl's eyes snapped open, and in an instant, she was beside him, gripping his arm. Her claws pricked through the fabric, but he didn't pull away. She looked at him with wide, urgent eyes and whispered the same words as before. Don't open. Her voice was trembling, yet sharp with certainty. Ryan froze, listening. The banging came again, this time followed by a low, mechanical hum. He stepped quietly to the window, peeking through the smallest gap in the curtain, and there they were, two tall figures in dark armor, their faces hidden behind smooth black masks. They carried long weapons, shock spears that glowed faintly blue at the tips. Behind them, two more figures held wide nets that shimmered faintly, the kind used to restrain living prey. Their armor reflected the dim light, but their movements were slow, controlled. They weren't searching randomly, they were hunting, and they knew exactly where to look. One of the armored hunters stepped closer to the door. Through the metal, Ryan could hear a voice, deep and cold. Human, open the door, the voice commanded. You have something that belongs to us? Ryan's jaw tightened. He said nothing, hoping they would leave. The silence stretched, then the voice came again. More threatening, return the escaped beast, and we will let you live. Ryan glanced at the girl. She was shaking, her tail wrapped around her legs, her eyes fixed on the door like it might burst open at any second. He could feel her fear, and something inside him hardened. She's not a beast, he thought, and she's not yours. He took a step closer to the door, speaking loud enough for them to hear, but steady in tone. There's no one here. The silence outside lasted only a moment before a metallic scrape rang out. One of them dragged a weapon along the metal wall. the sound sharp and deliberate. "We will come back," the voice promised. The hum of their gear faded slowly. Into the night, Ryan waited until he could no longer hear their footsteps before moving. The girl still clung to his sleeve. Her breathing was fast. Her ears flat against her head. Ryan gently pulled her toward the back of the room, away from the windows. She didn't resist when they reached the far wall. She crouched down, curling into a tight ball. Ryan sat beside her for a long time. Neither of them spoke. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Ryan wasn't sure. Every sound outside seemed sharper, more dangerous. Even the wind against the walls felt like it was trying to get in. At some point, the girl moved closer, pressing her head lightly against his arm. It was a small gesture, but it told him everything. She trusted him now, at least more than anyone else. When the night was at its deepest, Ryan heard something again. Not a bang this time. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. Circling the outpost, he held his breath. Through the window, he saw a faint glow moving between the trees, the same blue light from the hunter's weapons. They were still here, watching, waiting. He understood now. They weren't going to attack tonight. They wanted him to feel trapped. They wanted the girl to panic and run. Predators didn't always strike fast. Some waited until fear did the work for them. Ryan leaned close to her and whispered, "They're still out there, but we're safe." For now, she didn't answer, but she shifted closer to him, her tail brushing against his side. He didn't move away. Somewhere in the distance, a strange animal called out, but the hunters made no sound. It was almost worse than hearing them. The silence meant they were planning. Eventually, the faint light faded. Ryan didn't know if they had left or if they were still hiding just beyond sight, but he knew one thing for certain: they would be back. And next time, they wouldn't just knock. As the first pale light of dawn began to creep into the sky, the girl finally spoke again. Her voice was quiet, but there was a weight in her words. "They won't stop." Ryan met her gaze. She was right. He didn't know how far these hunters would go, but he knew he couldn't just wait for them to return. Something had to be done, and whatever it was, he and the girl would have to face it together. The sun was already high when Ryan opened his eyes. He had fallen asleep, sitting against the wall. The girl curled up beside him like a small shadow. Her breathing was steady now, slower than the night before. For the first time since he had found her, she seemed to be resting. Ryan stayed still. Not wanting to wake her, he knew she needed this moment of peace, even if it was only for a short while. When she finally stirred, she stretched lightly, her ears twitching in the morning light. Her golden eyes blinked open, and she looked at him for a long moment. Ryan smiled faintly. "Morning?" She didn't answer. But this time, she didn't look away either. Instead, she sat quietly, her tail wrapping neatly around her legs. There was a strange calm in her expression, like she had made a decision. They shared a simple breakfast, bread and a bit of dried meat Ryan had in storage. She ate slowly, her gaze distant, when she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain. "My name." "Kayla." Ryan froze. It was the first time she had given him more than a single word. "Kayla," he repeated, making sure to say it clearly. She nodded once, her ears lowered slightly, and she took a slow breath. "They took me from my home," she said quietly. Ryan set his cup down. She continued, her words broken, but clear enough for him to understand. "My people. The Wolven. We live far in the high forests of Lyra." Her tail flicked once, like the memory made her restless. "Hunters came, said we were dangerous, said we were not people, only beasts." Her claws flexed lightly against the wooden table. "They put collars on us, sold us like animals." Ryan's stomach tightened. He had heard of such things before. Alien slavers who justified cruelty by stripping others of their right to be called sentient. But seeing Kayla sitting across from him, small and trembling, made the reality hit harder. "How did you get here?" he asked softly. Kella's eyes lowered. Ship crashed. Storm broke it. I ran. She touched the collar at her neck, the metal catching the light. It shocks. If I fight, if I run too far, her voice shook at the edges. But she kept going. I hid. 3 nights, outside your door. Ryan's mind went back to that first night, the scratching at his door. She had been there before he even noticed, watching, waiting, deciding if she could trust him. "Why me?" he asked, his tone gentle. Kella's golden eyes met his. "You didn't smell like them." She said simply, it was such a small reason, but it carried weight. She had trusted his scent, his presence, enough to risk being seen. Ryan leaned back. Exhaling slowly, the hunters who came to his door weren't just passing by. They were here for her, and they wouldn't stop until they had her again. "Kayla," he said, "if they find you, what will they do?" She hesitated, her tail curling tighter. "They will take me to the pits," she whispered. Ryan frowned. "Pits?" Her voice was barely more than a breath now. "Where they make us fight." Until we can't. The image burned into Ryan's mind. Kayla forced into some alien arena. Treated like a monster for the entertainment of others. She was small. But he had seen the sharpness in her movements, the way her senses reacted to danger, to those hunters. She wasn't a child. She was a prize. A weapon to be used. Keela's ears twitched suddenly, pulling both of them back into the present, from outside. A faint hum echoed the sound of engines. Ryan stood, moving to the window, through the thin morning mist. He saw the shape of a low-flying craft moving between the treetops. It wasn't a cargo hauler or a passenger ship. It was a hunter skiff, and it was scanning the ground. Kella's claws dug into the edge of the table. "They're back," she said. Her voice low. Ryan grabbed his jacket. "They won't stop until they have you," he muttered. Her eyes searched his face, as if trying to read his intentions. "You'll give me to them?" she asked. The question made his chest ache. "No," he said firmly. Kayla blinked, a faint, surprised sound escaping her throat. Ryan began packing supplies, water, dried food, a small medkit, and a toolkit. Kayla watched, her ears twitching. "In confusion, we're leaving," he said. She hesitated, then stood, moving to his side without another word, for the first time since they met. There was no fear in her step, only readiness. As Ryan slung his pack over his shoulder, he knew the quiet safety of the outpost was gone. From here on, every step would be a risk, but leaving Kayla behind was not an option. Outside, the forest waited vast, dangerous, and full of shadows. Somewhere in those shadows, the hunters moved closer. Kayla glanced up at him one last time before they stepped outside. Her eyes were bright, steady. She had given him her name. And now, without saying it, she was giving him something else, her trust. Ryan tightened his grip on his pack. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The forest was still when Ryan opened the outpost door. Mist clung to the ground, curling around the twisted roots and fallen branches. The air was cold and heavy, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and metal. Kayla stayed close to him, her ears flicking at every sound. Her tail was low, her body tense, ready to spring into a run at the slightest danger. They stepped into the trees, leaving the safety of the outpost behind. Ryan had lived on this planet for 2 years, but he had never gone deep into the wild zones. He knew enough to respect the forest and to fear it. Every path was a maze of vines and uneven ground. Every shadow could hide teeth. Now, with the hunters somewhere nearby, every step felt like walking into a trap. Kayla moved ahead, her bare feet silent on the damp soil. She seemed to know where to go, weaving between the trees with the ease of someone born here. Ryan followed, though he kept glancing back, twice. He thought he saw movement far behind them, a flicker of armor between the trunks. The hunters were keeping their distance, but they were following. They were waiting for the right moment to strike. Hours passed as they moved deeper into the forest. The air grew warmer. The mist thinning as the sun broke through the canopy in faint shifting beams. Ryan's pack felt heavier with every mile. Still, he didn't complain. Stopping was not an option. Kella's breathing stayed even, but her eyes never stopped scanning the trees. It was clear she had been hunted before. By midday, they reached a narrow ravine. A shallow stream ran through it, its surface glittering with pale light. Kayla crouched by the edge, dipping her hands into the water and drinking quickly. Ryan joined her, but kept one hand on the handle. Of his knife, the forest was too quiet here. Even the constant hum of insects had gone silent. The first sound was faint, a metallic click. Kayla froze, her ears snapping toward the noise. Ryan's grip tightened on his knife from the shadows. Above the ravine, something flashed, a wide, shimmering net dropping toward them. Move! Ryan shouted. Kayla leaped aside with inhuman speed, rolling across the rocks as the net slammed into the ground where she had been. Ryan backed up, his heart pounding. The hunters had found them. Figures emerged from the tree line, their black armor glinting in the light. There were 4 of them this time, each armed with a shock spear. Kayla bared her teeth. A low growl rumbling from her throat. Ryan knew they couldn't win a fight here. Not surrounded, he grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a narrow gap in the rocks. This way. They ran, their footsteps pounding against the stone. The hunters followed, their heavy boots cracking branches and sending echoes through the ravine. A spear struck the ground just behind them, crackling with blue energy. Kayla didn't slow. She darted into the gap, the space barely wide enough for Ryan to squeeze through. On the other side was a steep slope covered in thick ferns. They slid down, dirt and leaves kicking up around them. At the bottom, the forest opened into a stretch of tangled roots and glowing plants. The air here smelled faintly sweet, masking their scent. Kayla motioned for Ryan to follow her along a winding path between the roots. She moved quickly, but carefully, avoiding dry twigs and loose stones that would make noise. Ryan realized she wasn't just running, she was leading them somewhere. They stopped at the base of a massive tree whose trunk was wider than Ryan's outpost. A hollow opening yawned at the base. Dark and deep, Kayla slipped inside without hesitation. Ryan followed, ducking into the shadows inside. The space was large enough to stand, the walls lined with old claw marks. Kayla crouched near the entrance, her ears twitching. The hunter's footsteps grew fainter, then passed by entirely. For now, they were safe. Ryan leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "Do you know this place?" Akia nodded. "My people hide here before they take us," she said quietly. Ryan looked at her. "You've done this before?" Her golden eyes met his many times, she admitted, but never with someone who stayed. They waited in silence for almost an hour outside. The forest slowly came back to life, birds calling, insects buzzing, the sound of the stream far away. But Ryan knew the hunters were still out there. They would not give up, not until they had Kayla in chains again. He also knew something. Else the next time they were found, running might not be enough. Kayla moved closer, her voice low. "There is a place," she said. "Old, broken. My people's home before the hunters came." Her tail twitched once. "If we reach it, they cannot follow inside." Ryan nodded slowly. It was a risk, but it was better than hiding until they were cornered. He adjusted his pack and checked his knife. "Then we go there," he said. Kayla gave a small, sharp smile. The first he had seen from her. She stood, ears alert, and stepped toward the entrance. The forest outside seemed calmer now, but Ryan could feel the danger still lurking. Just beyond sight, the chase wasn't over. It had only just begun. The journey to Kella's hidden place was long and winding. They moved under the thick canopy, the light shifting between gold and green. Ryan's boots crunched softly on the moss, while Kella's bare feet made no sound at all. She led with quick glances over her shoulder, guiding him through narrow gaps in the trees and over fallen logs slick with rain. The forest seemed endless. But Kayla moved with certainty. Ryan realized she knew this land like the lines on her hands. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a deep valley. Far below, Ryan could see the ruins Kayla had spoken of, tall stone walls half buried in vines. Broken towers leaning under the weight of years. The place looked abandoned, yet there was something about it that felt watchful. Kayla crouched beside him, her golden eyes scanning the valley. "No hunter comes here," she whispered. Ryan raised a brow. "Why not?" Her ears flicked back. "They say it is cursed." They descended carefully, keeping to the shadows. As they neared the ruins, Ryan saw the walls were carved with strange symbols. Worn but still visible, inside, the air was cooler, carrying the scent of damp stone and old earth. Kayla moved with ease, slipping between broken archways and crumbling pillars. "This was my people's home before," she said, her voice quiet. Her tail brushed lightly against the floor as she walked. Ryan could almost feel the history here. A place once alive with life, now silent. They reached the heart of the ruins, where a wide open space was surrounded by stone columns. In the center stood a broken fountain, its basin filled with rainwater. Kayla stopped and turned to him, her expression sharp. "They will find us here," she said, "but we can make them pay." Ryan studied her face, realizing she wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. They began preparing. Ryan unpacked his tools wire, scrap metal, and a small energy cell he had kept for emergencies. Kayla vanished into the forest and returned with long vines, sharp stones, and branches shaped like spears. Together, they set traps through the narrow entryways, tripwires hidden under leaves, pits disguised with woven branches. Ryan rigged the energy cell to a cluster of metal shards, creating a crude but powerful explosive. Kayla watched closely, asking short questions. Learning quickly, her claws worked as deftly as his tools when the sun began to sink, painting the ruins in deep orange light. They were ready. Ryan stood beside Kayla at the center of the open space. The traps were set. The paths narrowed. If the hunters came, they would have to pass through every one of them. Kayla's tail swished slowly, her ears locked on the distant sounds of the forest. "They're coming," she said simply. Ryan heard it then too, the low hum of their gear, the crunch of boots on soil. From the shadows between the trees, the hunters appeared, 4 of them again, their black armor gleaming faintly. Shock spears glowing blue, they moved with caution. Scanning the ruins, one stepped forward, speaking in that same cold voice. "Human, step aside, and you may leave alive." Ryan didn't move. "She's not yours," he said, his voice steady. The lead hunter tilted his head. "Then you will die with her." They advanced, and the first stepped into the entryway. The tripwire snapped, releasing a heavy net weighted with stones. It crashed onto him, knocking him to the ground. Before he could cut free, Kayla darted forward, striking his helmet with a sharp stone. The second hunter charged, only to fall into the hidden pit, his spear clattering against the stone walls. The third swung his weapon toward Ryan. But Ryan triggered the explosive. A burst of light and sound filled the air. Shards of metal and dust blinded the hunter, forcing him to stumble back. Kayla moved like a shadow, her claws flashing, her tail whipping for balance. She wasn't fighting like prey. She was fighting like someone reclaiming her freedom. Ryan covered her back, striking at any hunter who came close. They moved as one, each knowing where the other would be. When the dust cleared, 2 hunters were down, 1 trapped, and the last was backing away slowly, his masked face turned toward the forest. Then he fled, disappearing into the trees. Silence fell over the ruins, broken only by the sound of Ryan's heavy breathing. Kayla stood over the netted hunter, her chest rising and falling. She didn't strike again. Instead, she stepped back, letting him see her eyes. Golden and fierce, they carried a message. She was no longer his prey. Ryan pulled the remaining traps aside, letting the trapped hunter go. "Tell them," Ryan said, his voice low. "If they come again, it will be worse." The hunter said nothing. But the way he ran told Ryan the message had been received. Kayla turned to him, her ears relaxing for the first time in days. "She stayed," she said, her voice softer now. Ryan gave a tired smile. "Of course I stayed," as the night settled in. They sat beside the broken fountain. The danger wasn't gone, but something had changed. They had stood together, fought together, and won. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The ruins were quiet again. The echoes of the fight had faded, leaving only the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze. A few stars peeked through the gaps in the forest canopy. Casting pale light across the broken stone, Ryan sat on the edge of the fountain, his muscles aching, his hands scraped and bruised. Kayla sat across from him, her golden eyes reflecting the starlight. She was still breathing fast, but her tail rested loosely behind her, no longer curled tight in fear. For the first time since he had met her, she looked at peace. They had driven the hunters away. At least for now. Ryan knew they might come back, but something told him it wouldn't be so easy for them next time. Kayla had fought with everything she had, and now she carried herself differently. Not like prey, but like someone who had taken her life back. He passed her a small water flask. She drank slowly, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Her ears twitched toward the forest, listening for any sign of pursuit. When she heard nothing, she shifted closer, her tail brushing lightly against his boot. "You stayed," she said again. Almost like she was testing the words, Ryan gave a tired smile. "Of course I did." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment before she looked away. They stayed in the ruins that night. Ryan built a small fire in the shadow of the fountain, the flames throwing warm light over the stone walls. Kayla curled beside it, but not too far from him. Her fur caught the firelight, soft and silver against the darkness. At one point, Ryan noticed her tail had curled around his boot like an anchor. He didn't move it away. Morning came slowly, the first light turning the ruins gold. Ryan was already awake, watching Kayla sleep. When she stirred, she stretched, her claws scraping lightly against the stone. Her ears perked as she caught the smell of something cooking, a bit of bread toasted over the fire. She sat beside him quietly, eating without rush, for a while. Neither of them spoke. It wasn't an awkward silence, but a calm one. When they finished, Ryan finally asked, "So, what now?" Kayla tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you want me to take you to the human city?" He said, "They could help keep you safe, give you food, a place to live." Kayla's ears lowered slightly. "You want me to leave?" Ryan shook his head quickly. "No, I'm just giving you a choice." Kayla was quiet for a long moment, her gaze dropping to the ground. Then she stood, walked a few steps toward the forest, and stopped. Her tail swayed once before she turned back to face him. "I've been alone since they took me," she said softly. "I've run, I've hidden, I've slept in the cold. But since I found your door, I don't want to run anymore." She stepped closer, her golden eyes steady on his. "I will not leave your side." Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. He had offered her safety somewhere else, but she didn't want it. She wanted to stay with him, not because she had nowhere to go, but because she had chosen him. He nodded slowly. "All right. Then you stay." Kayla's ears perked at the words, and for the first time, She smiled without any trace of fear. They left the ruins together, heading back toward the outpost. The forest seemed different now, less like a maze and more like a path they shared. Kayla walked beside him instead of ahead, her steps matching his. Once she caught a faint scent and tensed. But when she saw it was only a harmless forest animal, she relaxed quickly. She no longer looked over her shoulder every few seconds. She didn't need to. She trusted he would be there when they reached the outpost. Ryan had expected her to hesitate at the door like she had that first night, but she didn't. She stepped inside confidently, glancing around like it was already her home. She went straight to the spot beside the heater, curling up with a satisfied sigh. Her tail wrapped loosely around her legs, her ears twitching lazily. Ryan watched her for a moment before sitting down at his desk. The storm, the hunters, the fear, it all felt distant now as the day faded and night returned. Ryan locked the door and dimmed the lights. Kayla stirred and looked at him, her eyes catching the glow. "You'll stay?" she asked quietly, though she already knew the answer. Ryan smiled. "Always." She nodded, curling up again. Her breathing slowed, and soon she was asleep. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. But inside, the small outpost was warm. Ryan leaned back in his chair, glancing at her one more time. She had been a stranger at his door, cold and afraid. Now she was part of his life, and he couldn't imagine sending her away. The hunters might come again, and the forest would still be full of dangers, but whatever came, they would face it together. And he knew no matter what happened, she would never leave his side.